Thursday, January 13th. Whoops. Thursday, January 13th, 2022. Tonight, we're going to do a snapshot on the coming year of 2022 Solar Public Policy Snapshot. Where we hope to go, and with a look back on some of the foundation bricks that were put in place in the last year or so that we're going to be building on. Our presentation tonight is by two people, John Freeman, Executive Director of GLREA, and the esteemed John Richter, our Advisor for GLREA. Our financial sponsors for this seminar series includes the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, McNaught and McKay, and Harvest Solar. Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association was formed in 1991. We celebrated our 30th year anniversary last year. A 501c3 nonprofit organization supported by members to educate and advocate for renewable energy in Michigan. You can join and support the work that we're doing here. One, you can join the group. You can renew your membership. You can encourage others to join. And you can make a financial donation to GLREA. In all these cases, you can go to our website or you can contact our Executive Director, John Freeman, directly at jfreeman13@comcast.net. Our GLREA Zoom program tonight is part of a seminar series that happens each month, every Thursday. The first month of each Thursday of each month, we do a series, start out with Solar Stories, Ann Arbor Solar Stories, that are hosted by Julie Roth, manager at Solarize Ann Arbor. This is a discussion of case studies of leading good, solid solar projects in Ann Arbor. The second Thursday of each month is my Clean Energy Seminar, where I'm your host. I'm the Vice President of GLREA and a lifetime member. Third Thursday of each month, we do Detroit Solar Stories, similar to Ann Arbor. It's hosted by Diane Van Bureau. She's the member of the GLREA Board of Directors and President of Zachary and Associates, which is a development, finance, and planning consultants. Diane does case studies on meritorious solar projects going on in Detroit and Southeast Michigan. And the fourth story, which kicked this all off, is John Sever, who started this 2 or 3 years ago with hosting a series called My Solar Stories across Michigan and questions and answers. And that was so successful that everything that came after it, all the other Thursdays that were taken up, started with this. Janet, if others can put their mute on, I would very much appreciate it. Our Clean Energy Seminar series covers topics of interest to clean energy users, renewable energy policies, businesses, and advocates. They include contents ranging from technology to business to public policy. The first session each year is a status update on clean energy in Michigan from the perspective of utility industries, state government, and of course the industry, being us, the solar industry. The Clean Energy Seminar is a Zoom event, and of course, again, it's held at the second Tuesday of each month from 7 to 8. Questions and comments and suggestions should be directed to me as your host, Mark Clevey, and my email is mclevey123@gmail.com. We ask that you remember to mute yourself and hold all questions until the end of the presentation. You can raise your hand under reactions to ask a question, and I will call on you. Tonight, we welcome the 2022 Clean Energy Seminar Kickoff meeting. Tonight, John Freeman, Executive Director, and John Richter, again, Senior Policy Advisor, will present on GLREA's plans, in the words of Julie Baldwin, the Michigan Public Service Commission, to speed up the solar train in 2022. We will talk about GLREA's Michigan Public Service Commission regulatory policy work, GLREA's legislative policy work, and the importance of leveraging GLREA's members, you, to exert influence on legislators and the new Solarized GLREA initiative across the state. And so without further ado, John and John, I welcome John Richter to kick this off to our Clean Energy Seminar. John?
Thank you for that great introduction. Okay, can you see my slide now?
Yes.
Excellent. Oh, I know what I need to do. There we go. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about the solar train on two different sets of parallel tracks. There's the on-site solar, also sometimes called customer-owned solar, rooftop solar. And then I'm going to talk about utility scale solar. So rooftop solar got a big acceleration back in 2008 when the legislature passed net metering. Net metering had been the law of the land in a lot of states, but Michigan was a little late. We got it in 2008. The same law also created the renewable portfolio standard, requiring utilities to get 10% of their energy from renewables, which really accelerated the utility solar train. And the net metering part of that, you got full retail credit for extra electricity you produced and fed back into the grid. But they limited that to 1% of the utility's peak generation capacity, which back in 2008 seemed like plenty of room for the solar industry. However, in 2016, the legislature passed Act 342, which replaced net metering and directed the Public Service Commission to set up a new distributed generation system. Now, the law specified that your credit for exported energy that you put back on the grid would be one of two things. Either it would be locational marginal price, which is about 3 cents a kilowatt hour. It's the wholesale rate of electricity that utilities use when they buy and sell electricity to each other. Or it could be the supplier's power supply component of their costs, excluding transmission. That sounds a little complicated, but if you look at your utility bill, it actually calls out power supply costs versus transmission costs. And in the various cases that have occurred since then, this is what the Public Service Commission has approved for each of the utilities. And so now in Michigan, unless you have one of the old net metered systems that was grandfathered in, you're getting about half of the retail rate as your credit for exported power. The law also limited the size of your system so that it should only be generating the amount of power that you would consume over the course of the year, and that you're not becoming basically a power generator for the utility that's flooding power into it. And it also limited that the credit could only apply to the power supply charges on your bill. Now, despite that rather dramatic change in solar policy in Michigan, distributed generation has continued to grow rather robustly. Now, unfortunately, this data is a little old. It only shows 2020. I don't have the data for 2021 yet. But from 2019 to 2020, we grew another 37%. And you can see, I mean, it's an exponential curve. This is a very nice growth rate. So a little surprising on my part, the shift to distributed generation rather than net metering doesn't seem to have slowed down the distributed generation too much. Part of that, of course, is because solar keeps getting cheaper. The other thing people have done is include battery systems with their solar system. So this was a new table in this annual report that the MPSC creates. And in 2019, it said DTE had 152 customers with batteries. Well, you can see on this chart for the end of 2020, they had 615 customers with batteries. So we got this sudden enormous jump in battery installations with solar. And what this enables people to do, it does two things. One is that, of course, it gives you some protection against power outages, right? That you can run some critical loads off your battery system for some period of time. But the other is it allows you to take power that you would have exported to the utility, put it in your battery, and then use it at another time at night when your panels aren't creating power, and so displacing you from buying power from the utility at the full retail rate. So it's sort of a way of arbitraging that difference between what you pay them and what they pay you. Unfortunately, the 2016 law that did away with net metering did not do away with the cap. Now, this is a cap on participation in net metering and distributed generation. It's from the original net metering law, and people call it the 1% cap. because it really is 1%, but the 1% is broken out into 3 different sections. 0.5% of the utilities peak load can be met with small customers, 20 kilowatts or less. That's typically residential. 0.25% reserved for systems between 20 kilowatts and 150 kilowatts. That's usually commercial. And then another 0.25% for methane digesters, of which there are operating right now in Michigan, 0. So it's effectively a 0.75% cap. Now, this is a table as of the end of 2020. So unfortunately, it's also dated of how close each of the utilities are to reaching their cap for category 1, the 20 kilowatt and under. And I've noted in red here that 2 of these utilities have increased their cap voluntarily. In the case of UPCO, this was part of a settlement agreement that was reached on one of their cases. So they they tripled their cap so that for category 1 now, instead of 0.5%, it's 1.5%. And you can see due to that increase, they're now only at 36% of that cap, right? In terms of how many people are participating, how many are allowed to. They hit the cap, right? And they had to raise it or put people on some other program. Consumers Energy has also increased their cap. They've doubled it. And yet at the end of 2020, they were still at 57%. Detroit Edison is still at 0.5%. And this is a projection from Consumers Energy in their latest case on when they'll be hitting their cap. The dotted blue line here is category 1, and the dotted orange line is category 2, right? So it's half as much capacity. And I mean, it's a little hard to read. They show here's the gray bar, here's the current cap. It looks like sometime in this between 2022 and 2023. So I guess that's in the first half of 2023, we would see them hitting each of these caps. So the cap isn't constraining anybody from getting a solar system right now, but it's sort of looming on the horizon there. So in the Michigan legislature, there is a bill to eliminate the cap. And simply, it's not necessary anymore. The whole bill, it's called House Bill 4716, is only 5 pages long, right? So it's easy to go and read. It doesn't say much other than anywhere in the law it talks about this cap, just eliminate that. There were hearings at the House Energy and Technology Committee, and the Public Service Commission Chairman, Dan Scripps, testified, contrary to what the utilities keep saying, is there is no cross subsidy, right? The utilities keep playing the story that non-solar customers are subsidizing solar customers, and Dan Scripps stood up and said very directly, that's simply not true. He also said that there is no engineering reason.
Please mute yourself if you haven't. Please mute yourself, especially the new people that came on. Sorry, John.
No, I appreciate that. There is no engineering reason for a system-wide cap. It appears that there is enough support in the committee to move this for a vote in the full House, except that the committee chairman is not scheduling a vote. And you know, John, I would invite you to talk a little bit more on that point if you'd like to just interject right here.
That's fine. Yeah, the bill is in committee, and somebody needs to go on mute. So the way the legislature works is that they operate in 2-year cycles, and this is the 2nd year of the cycle. And so we need to get Representative Bellino, the chairman of the House Energy Committee, to hopefully hold a vote on the bill. If we don't get it done this year, then we have to start the whole process over next January. Now, this year is a little bit more challenging because it's also an election year. But this might work to our advantage because Representative Bellino is termed out. He's in his third 2-year term in the House, and you're only allowed 6 years total, but you can then run for the state Senate. And as a result of the redistricting commission, all the Senate lines have been redrawn. And so there's a Senate district that Joe Bellino can run in the Monroe area. But what's interesting is that he is probably going to be in a primary with another Republican state representative who is looking to move to the state Senate. And she is actually pretty good on renewable energy. And so we might be able to use the fact that Representative Bellino wants to go to the Senate. And if he doesn't hold a vote, then we may try and argue in a public manner that he is carrying water for the utilities. He's not helping any of the renewable energy businesses or activists or the environmental groups. And so we might be able to shame him literally into holding a vote. And so that's what we're going to probably try and do. The legislature has not started yet. They'll be back in session next week. And so we're going to move forward on working on the 1% bill, as well as the community solar bill, which I might get a chance to talk about a little later on after John is finished. But let's go back to John so he can complete his presentation, and then we can take some questions. John?
John, before you do, John, if I could just jump in for a quick sidebar, to put a fine point on how important this is and how it can go the wrong direction if we're not careful. Senator Jeff Irwin, when he was in the House for 8 years, he was on this committee. The first year he was elected to of his first 4-year term, he introduced a bill in the House Energy Committee to eliminate solar taxation, where people were taxed on their solar system. The committee chair was from the other party and wouldn't schedule a vote either, and locked solar taxation up for 8 years. And we weren't able to finally change that until Jeff left the House and moved on to the Senate, and we were able to finally change that. But this kind of game playing can get really nasty, and it can really hurt solar businesses, really hurt solar customers, really hurt the environment, really hurt everything we care about. So please be aware of what's happening here. And when John Freeman and others ask for your help with the House to write a letter, make a phone call, do whatever you need to do to get this changed, please listen, because this is very, very important stuff. Thank you.
So this cap was created when net metering was passed. There was a big concern that net metering was maybe too good a deal for solar users. I'd argue that wasn't true, but that was the perception. And so this cap was put in there as kind of a protection, but net metering's gone, and any cross subsidy that did exist doesn't anymore. Our electric utilities are, for the most part, state chartered monopolies. They are granted monopoly on selling electrical power. They are not granted a monopoly on generating it. Our distributed generation systems reduce the load on the distribution system, reduces line losses, and we have a right to generate our own power. So that's my message to the legislature, and why we need to get away with this, get rid of this obsolete cap. Shifting gears to the other set of tracks for the solar train, utility scale renewable energy. Size matters. So this is US photovoltaic installation capacity each year. You'll see it's been growing at a nice rate, but it breaks it out into residential, commercial, community solar, which John is going to talk about, and utility solar. And you see that residential is substantial and commercial's there, but the bulk of the new solar being added in the country is being added by the utility companies. This is also true in Michigan. So this is the same sort of graph, but for Michigan, and you can see, again, the utility solar is the lion's share of the new solar being installed, and that's only going to accelerate based on what we're seeing in the utilities integrated resource plans, which I'll talk about in a minute. This is what utility solar looks like. It's acres and acres. This is DTE's 28 megawatt system. It's up near Lapeer. It covers 250 acres. So, I mean, you have to get an aerial shot like this just to kind of comprehend the scale of it. Now, 2 years before they put this in, there was only 5 megawatts of photovoltaics in the entire state, and they added 58 in a shot, right? And now we're seeing, 50 and 100 megawatt solar farms going in. Why is that? Well, here is why. It's cheap is the answer. Lazard makes a practice of determining the levelized cost of energy by different sources. So they look at the cost of building a plant, the cost of operating it, the fuel going in, the property taxes, everything that goes into owning a generation facility. And then they divide that by the power that it would create over its lifetime, and they come up with this levelized cost of energy. And what you see is there's 3 sources that the utility can build, 3 different kinds of facilities that are all competing with each other. Solar, whether it's crystalline or thin film, wind facilities, which have a kind of a broader range of costs, and combined cycle natural gas plants. And everything else is just dramatically more expensive. Now, wind is also pretty cheap, but wind from a utility perspective has another problem, which is that it generates mostly at the wrong time. So the yellow line here is solar output, and the green line is energy demand. And so you can see the solar doesn't match energy demand exactly, but it's fairly close. And if you add some batteries to shift it over a little bit, you're doing pretty well. Whereas wind, it tends to be much windier at night than it is during the day, which is exactly when we need the least power. Also, if you looked at this seasonally, it tends to be windier in the winter than it is in the summer. And of course, demand is generally highest in the summer due to air conditioning load. So wind is a good and low-cost way of generating clean electricity. It's just you don't want to add too much of it to the grid because it's quite out of sync with your demand periods. So this is the capacity of different kinds of generating facilities that the utilities have been adding over the past years. And this dark blue one at the bottom is solar. And you see that for the last 3 years, we've added more solar generating capacity to the US grid than any other source. And natural gas was number 2 for 2 years, and wind was number 2. There's number 1 in this year. It's just these 3. Everything else, there's other, and there's coal, and coal got crowded out back here in 2014, and other is rather small. It's a 3-player game, right? It's solar and wind, both of which are clean, and natural gas. Michigan requires each of its utilities or its large utilities to provide the Public Service Commission with an integrated resource plan. This is their plan for what new capacity they're going to add, what they're going to retire, how they're going to meet demand across the next 20 years. DTE's most recent IRP was in 2018, and I've created this graph reflecting what their plan was. So you see blue here is wind and yellow is solar. And then they have VGP. So this is their voluntary green power program for large customers, companies, factories that consume a lot of power and want to buy green power and are willing to pay a premium for it. DTE will build facilities specifically for that. And so you see in the early years here, we've got wind and some of the VGP, and the customer can choose if that's wind or solar. So we don't know yet. It depends on what the companies sign up for. And then it shifts to solar plus the VGP, and then we've got kind of a solar and a little wind. Well, I'll give you a total here. So by 2030, it's looking at almost 2,300 megawatts of renewables. That's fairly substantial. However, if we compare that to Consumers Energy's plan, they're looking at adding 4,000 megawatts of solar by 2030. And they're a smaller grid, actually. They have a smaller customer base. Now, in this case, it's all solar, right? They're not doing wind. They're not doing a BGP program, or at least, well, it's small. It's not in this graph. But I'm comparing two plans. So the green is their 2018 plan, how much solar they're going to add, and the blue is the 2021 plan. And they've kind of, backed off a little bit. So you see in the early years, it's the same. And then the new plan is less solar in 2026 and a lot less solar in some years in here. And then they kind of catch up, at the tail end of the plan. So they've sort of backloaded the solar on the latest plan. And that's because they're proposing to buy 4 natural gas power plants, 3 of which are owned by one of their related companies. However, they're also planning to accelerate their coal plant retirements. So Campbell units 1 and 2, they're accelerating their retirement. Last plan, they had said they were going to retire it in 2031. They've moved that up to 2023. And Campbell Unit 3, which is newer, they were going to keep running that till 2039. Now they're proposing to shut it down in 2025. So this would be, a big shift, a lot less pollutants going in the air. And, it's a pretty good plan. And we have lots of detail to argue with, particularly about the purchase of these affiliate gas plants. But they're closing down coal and they're building a lot of solar. And in the big picture, that's a good thing. That is everything I had put together here. I've got some links, which are probably hard to read and impossible to write down. But if you just drop me an email, oh my, I clicked on one of the links. I didn't mean to do that. If you send me an email, I'll gladly send you a copy, and those links will be legible. And back to you.
John, thank you very much. John Freeman, do you want to weigh in sometime on some of this?
Well, let's see if there are any questions for John
Okay.
Richter while John's content is fresh, because I'm sure there will be a few people that may have questions or clarifying points.
Again, just go to reactions and raise your hand, and you'll show up on the screen up here, and I'll call upon you. Nobody's done it so far, so John, I'll be first. On those 2 natural gas plants, I agree with you. It's great they're shutting down coal, but we still have the problem of massive fugitive methane leaks in the natural gas industry from, all the way from the wellhead, all the way through the pipeline, every place except to, my stove here. And I don't see anywhere in the Public Service Commissions or in the IRPs where they talk about using blockchain technology or anything at all about that, which means that the only plan we have to stop fugitive methane is at the White House, locked up by Joe Manchin and Representative Sinema. So, it's on one hand, it's a good idea, but there's lots of research out there that says that methane's worse than coal.
Yeah,
so,
and I've seen that, and that was part of my testimony, Mark. And I cited a number of studies, and it kind of depends on how much methane you think is leaking, which they don't have. They got some very conflicting studies on that, and the time frame that you do your study in. But the Public Service Commission does have a work group that just started. I was at their kickoff meeting last week on renewable natural gas.
Oh, that's great.
At this point, it's just a study that's being done. And there's a very limited amount of that you can produce because you're using biomass as a feedstock, and there's only so much of it around. As far as the gas plants in the plan, there are 4 that they're proposing, one of which it looks like no one is opposing and it will probably get approved. The other 3 are quite contentious. And so we'll have to wait for a commission ruling to see what happens there.
Sounds good. Wayne Applesauer, do you have your hand up? Go ahead, my friend.
Yeah, John. When you talked about the need for solar over wind because of it not lining up with things, you want to comment about if we are actually trying to electrify everything, and the fact that when people like me have a heat pump that heats our house in the wintertime, and we use twice as much energy to heat my house in the winter than it does to cool my house in the summertime, it changes the nature of things rather dramatically. And so I think
Mhm.
we're going to have to actually do more wind or a whole lot of storage, long-term storage, in order to make that work. Because, you know, I get a lot less solar in the wintertime as everyone else does. And 70% of what I produce goes out on the web right now on an annual basis. Thank you.
Hmm.
Wayne, that's a great point. So I was showing the demand curve as it is today, but if we get serious about climate change and electrification, one of the big aspects of that is electrifying heating and using heat pumps or geothermal heat pumps in place of burning gas. And at that point, wind lines up quite nicely with that demand, right? Because it's more in the winter and more at night. And those are the times when it's colder. So yes, thank you. Excellent point.
Great, thanks. Jay, you're up.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out on the slide where you were showing where solar goes and produces a lot of energy during the sunlit hours, but then in the evening we get less solar, and the grid is under a heavier load because people are coming home and cooking dinner and firing up the TV and whatnot. A real good slide or image that shows that real well is a thing called the duckbill curve. And if you Google for the duckbill curve, you'll find some really good shareable images on that really, really show how much impact as solar gets deployed more and more each year after year. It shows how much we've taken the load off of the grid during the sunlit hours, and how once we're no longer pumping power to the grid, that's when they're needing the greatest amount. So do a Google search of duckbill curve, and I think you'll like
The duck curve, and I'm certainly familiar with it.
Good.
And this has shown up particularly in California and Hawaii, where they've got a lot of solar installed. And with all the solar production, there's very little demand on the grid because people are producing it themselves during the sunlight hours. And then as the sun goes down, demand is going up and output from the solar systems is plunging, and you get this sudden ramp up of perceived demand from the utility, which has been a challenge for them.
John Sarver, you're up. You got a question?
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to be building new nuclear power plants, at least in Michigan. But I'm just kind of curious, John, when they do their planning and stuff, do they plan to keep the existing nuclear power plants going for as long as possible, or do they actually talk about phasing those out at some point too?
It's a split answer. So what is it? Palisades that Consumers has a PPA with, that's going to be closing the next couple of years here. There's a date on that. It's scheduled. Conversely, the Fermi nuclear power plant, Fermi 2, that DTE is running, they plan to keep running that, I don't know, at least till 2040, and probably as long as anyone will let them.
Yeah, that was just renewed a couple of years ago and extended. They actually increased the capacity of Fermi 2 by bringing in higher output motors and things like that. And, they have been approved for Fermi 3. So nobody's putting pen to engineering specs out there, but there is the FERC gave them a green light to pursue it. We'll see. Nicolette, is it Nicolette? Yes, please.
It's Nicolette.
It is Nicolette.
There are a number of companies now that are starting to look into smaller wind systems for individual homes, like wind trees and things like that. Do any of the current laws address how much electricity or home use of wind electricity, especially in combination with solar? So in the evening, we're still producing, in winter, when it drops drastically, I've been looking at my trees and saying, I wish I could have wind as well as solar. So is there anything around for individual home use of wind yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So net metering and the distributed generation tariff apply equally well to wind. They don't really care which way you're producing it. So if you want to connect, under that program, you're still limited in terms of the system size, that over the year it should only produce your total usage. You're limited to 20 kilowatts under category 1. Category 2 has more rules and more expenses and things. Yeah, you can certainly do that. And there are, as Wayne was talking about, synergies between wind and solar because they produce at different times.
Nicolette, John Sarver and I were both very involved in the wind programs before we retired. And there's just about every township's got some sort of ordinance on wind. So depending on where you are, you can check to see what the wind ordinance is for where you live. Some cities like Troy have urban ordinances for wind generation and stuff. So that'll get you well along the way. And they may have the airports keep wind data. So, your local township, if they have an ordinance on wind, they probably have information about wind speeds, wind loading, and stuff like that as well. So if you look for a wind contractor, GLREA can help you find a good one.
Mark, we may want to
Yes.
think about inviting Art Toy
That's a good idea.
or to a session, maybe John Sarver too, because Art is the only one I know that was in the business of installing small wind systems. And he's actually kind of phased out of it in the last couple of years, but I still think he's pretty knowledgeable about it. And he might be a good person to bring on board to talk about whether there are some new technological developments that might
Right.
make the economics and the efficiency of small wind systems worthwhile to look at now.
Okay. Why don't you send me Art's contact information and I'll definitely get with him.
He's hard to get a hold of.
Great. Great.
Go ahead, Kate.
Is there, when you say there's a cap, on producing wind or solar, is it a cap saying we cannot produce more than that, or the consumer's energy, for example, won't take in more than 1%?
Right. So when enough people have signed up that they reach that cap, they won't put anyone else into the distributed generation program, right? They would have to find some other tariff, some other program to put you in, which would probably pay you, much less for any outflow that you have. But you have a right to your own generation, right? If you're not going to export power out to the utility, well, then they have very little say in that.
Right.
Right. You're generating your own power. And obviously there's electric code that comes into play and stuff, but the utility just has to make sure what you're doing isn't going to screw up their grid. And if you're not exporting power and you can convince them the system really will never do that, it's not really their call anymore. But as soon as you want to export, then it's a question of, well, what are the terms and conditions of that? The distributed generation tariff is certainly the most favorable one, but there are some other programs that were really designed for like factories that would have a big generating plant, on site or something. And so they don't fit a homeowner very well, but it's one of the concerns is, when you hit the cap, what exactly happens? What would you get signed up into, right?
Mhm.
And it's not entirely clear.
You can bypass that, Kate, by doing batteries. If you put batteries in your system, there'll be a switch. So anytime there's excess power laying there, with a switch, literally your inverter won't send power to the utility. So it just sends it to your battery stuff. If you're also charging your electric car off your inverter, same thing. So you can store that excess electricity there. My sense is that the utilities are not going to play that game on the cap. They'll take it right up to the end every time, just so they can blackmail us into giving them the maximum subsidy for unearned profits. But they like to. They did the same thing with wind for years. Letting it taking the wind credit right up to the last moment, and then opening it up, and it's very effective at hurting small businesses and consumers and our children. I mean, it's really good at that. They're really good at maximizing pain so they can generate more profit. And they're really good at extorting us. And the Michigan legislature and the Michigan Public Service Commission allow them to do it. So if the best thing you could probably do is do solar and batteries now, and continue to grow your solar system every year, add on a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, and when UPCO hit their cap, they didn't sign people into a different program. They just stopped processing applications.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know,
Nice guys.
But that speaks to something that Vincente raised on the chat is whether there is a potential legal strategy involved that says
Right.
that people have the right to generate their own electricity. The question is whether they have the right to be connected to the grid, which
Right.
really raises the question, who owns the grid in Michigan? Is it because it's a regulated monopoly? Does that mean the utilities own it or the shareholders own it on Wall Street? Or is it more of a public trust and that the utilities run on behalf of the people of Michigan? And so just to answer Vincente's point is that I have been keeping track of potential legal strategies that have engaged around the country, keeping in mind that we may have to go down that road. And clearly, what John just talked about is what happens if the cap is reached and the legislature doesn't act, what happens then? I mean, that
Right.
will be a critical point that we have we'll have to monitor. Why don't we let Violet, I'm sorry, is it
Nicolette, right?
Nicolette make one more quick comment, and then I'm going to say a few words about some other matters to wrap this session up. Go ahead, Nicolette.
Yeah, my comment was that when I installed my solar panels, consumers wouldn't let me go above 90% of my electrical use. And so I only have a 3 kilowatt system because of that. I couldn't go, even though I told them I'm going to be getting an electric car, which I've gotten since then, they would not let me install additional panels. It was kept to 90%. So I don't know if they can legally do that, but they did it.
Well, they might have been able to do at the time if the load for the previous 12 months equaled to the size of the system you got, then they were within their legal right to limit it. But as a result of buying an electric car, if your load now is bigger, more than what your solar system is providing, then I think you have a legal right to add on to your solar system, and consumers can't say no to that.
That was my other question. I have net metering. If I add on, would they switch me?
yes, they would.
And therefore I don't want to add on if I don't have to. So
Yeah, when you installed that, I mean, there is a waiver process to say I have a reasonable expectation of increasing my load because I'm buying an EV and getting a higher number set. But if they didn't go for that right off the bat, you probably would have had to go to the Public Service Commission and make a case of it, to fight with them about it. And that's, they can slow things down and dissuade people just by making it difficult.
right.
I want to transition to my presentation by making a comment that John and I should be making a very important comment. John showed how the cost of producing electricity by solar and wind is dramatically cheaper than producing electricity by coal, nuclear power, and increasingly natural gas. But the irony is that the electricity rates we're paying as residential use is not going down. Consumers is asking for consistent rate increases as well as DTE, even as they're incorporating more and more lower costing solar and renewable energy into the mix. And so it's kind of perverse in the sense that it's costing the utilities less to produce electricity, and yet they're not passing the savings on to the residents at all. And in fact, they keep increasing the rates, which really speaks to the fact that that someone like Matthew Caldwell, who's in the business of selling solar systems, he can make the pitch to people, it's worth investing in solar now because utility rates are going to keep increasing. And you're going to save money immediately, but over time, you're going to save even more money as compared to your neighbor who keeps paying more for electricity, utility electricity, as the utilities keep raising the rates. So I just want to make that point. There was another point on the chat. And this kind of is another bizarre argument by the utilities. You know, the community solar legislation, there are two bills. One is sponsored by a Democrat, one's sponsored by a Republican. They're both tie-barred together, which means they both have to pass in order to take effect. It would establish community solar in Michigan, similar to what Minnesota has, which essentially says that the utilities are required to work with third-party developers that want to put together solar farm projects where individuals can subscribe to these panels, and the amount of electricity that these panels produce will then be credited back to the person's bill, whether they live in an apartment or a condominium or in their house, which may not be suitable for solar. Now, these two bills are in the House Energy Committee. There was a hearing that was held back in early November. Same problem with the 1% bill is that Joe Bellino is sitting on the two bills. I think it's pretty clear that since the two bills have been introduced by both a Democrat and Republican, that there's bipartisan support. And if he would hold a vote on the bill, that it would pass. But interesting enough, at that particular hearing, you know, where the sponsors of the bill testified and all the pro-bill supporters testified, consumers and DTE testified as well. And one of the ironies is that they said there's no need for this bill because we don't need to have third-party developers developing community solar because the utilities are developing solar. It's called the Green Power Plan for DTE. But one of our members, one of the people on this event put on the chat, you know, that you actually pay more if you want to subscribe to the green power electricity than you would the normal rate for electricity. And so if you buy your own system, you're going to save money on generating electricity, because once you pay off your system, whether it's 7, 8, or 9 years, because I'll go back to Matthew, because Matthew, you know, warranties the panels for 25 years, or the manufacturer actually does, that you're going to get essentially free electricity for another 15 years or so after you pay off the system. So you can get cheaper electricity by investing in solar, as well as doing the right thing in terms of protecting the environment, reducing carbon pollution and all that. And yet the utilities, if you want to buy solar from the utilities, specifically solar from the utilities, they actually charge you more. And so that's another argument for why we need to preserve the right of individuals and small business to be able to install their own energy systems. And for those people that don't live in a house that doesn't face south, they live in an apartment or a condominium, or they can't afford the full upfront cost of installing a solar system. This is why community solar is so important, because no matter where you live, you know, if you can subscribe to a series of panels that are owned by a third-party developer within DTE's district or jurisdiction, then DTE, under this law, if it was enacted, they would be required to credit that amount of power back to the person's bill that DTE would send them. And so that is why these two bills are a top priority for GLREA. And so one of the things, Mark made an introduction about what are some of our key priorities for 2022. So as John pointed out, we're involved with the regulatory system. This is policy that's established by the Public Service Commission. And just like John argued, we intervene, which means we become a legal party to a case on all rate increases, consumers and DTE primarily. And then, of course, the Integrated Resource Plan is also a formal case. It's a 10-month-long process that we also intervene and participate. And John mentioned how he and Rob Raffson have submitted testimony and filed briefs, and we'll be responding to briefs by the other parties. And we're making our best argument to both the administrative law judge as well as the 3 commissioners about what the right thing for them to do is. But the second area is the legislature. Now, one of the things we're going to do this year is we're going to try and make it even easier for GLREA members to be able to take action by contacting their legislators. You know, the last couple of years, I've sent out emails where I've submitted a sample letter, and then I've laid out a chart of email addresses for legislators. And I've tried to make it as easy as possible, but it's still kind of a clumsy process. But we are going to buy some software. It's called, you'll love the title, it's called Do Gooder. It's a software system that makes it really easy for volunteers and for activists to be able to send emails, make phone calls to their legislators. And one example of this software is that if you don't know who your legislator is, this software allows you to type in your address of no matter where you live in Michigan, and the software will immediately tell you who your state representative is and who your state senator is. And then we can load a letter, a kind of a draft letter that you then can edit. You can add your own comments. You can rewrite it in your own language. You can do whatever you want, or you can just send it as it is. And this way, we think it will be even easier for all of you to be able to become more active in letting your legislator know your opinions. And many of you may recall that I actually served in the legislature. And so it's really important to understand that when legislators get letters or emails or phone calls from their constituents back home, they take it very seriously because they know that, that they actually work for you, you're paying their salary, and that you also have lots of friends and family members within that district that you could contact and either say nice things about the legislator or say nasty things about the legislator. And this is an election year. And one of the interesting things this year is that the state Senate is all up for an election, all 36 members, and the entire 110 House of Representatives are also up for election. But there was a major change this year that the district lines have been redrawn because they have to be redrawn every 10 years after the census is done. And because the voters of Michigan established a redistricting commission, and I just want to give a shout out to John Sarver, who was very active in that campaign, that he was able to get this thing on the ballot and the people of Michigan voted for it. And so we had a citizens commission redraw all the state Senate lines and the state House lines. In the past, the political party that was in power were able to draw the lines. And so of course they would draw them to their advantage, but the Citizens Commission redrew the lines and they're much fairer, in terms of Democrat and Republican. And so now the state Senate, as the saying goes, is in play, that we have a real shot. When I say real shot, I'm a Democrat, so I say Democrats have a real shot of taking control. I don't want to emphasize that too much because renewable energy is actually supported on a bipartisan basis. And there are some Democrats that are not good. But in general, we have a real opportunity to elect more pro-solar and pro-geothermal members to the legislature. And so stay tuned for information regarding efforts by GLREA to advocate on behalf of these legislative policies, as well as potentially getting involved in some of the campaigns and everything. I got 7 minutes left. I'm going to take 2 more minutes and then I'm going to open up for any final questions or comments. The other big thing we're going to do this year is the Solarize GLREA program. The Solarize program is an effort to educate people about the benefits of solar. And we want to do it in a group format where we try and get people to organize their networks of friends on a Zoom call. And then we have a solar installer like Matthew come in and explain what is the process from which to get solar? And then if we can get multiple people to commit coming out of these meetings to buying solar, and then the solar installer agrees in advance to give a discount on the installation price. This is a model that Ann Arbor has done extremely well, and Julie Roth has been the leader. And a year ago, last April, she turned the model over to GLREA and said, if you can develop this model and try and get solarized activities going on in other parts of the state outside of Ann Arbor, we will be very happy to work with you and provide you with any support. And so we're trying to move this program throughout the state of Michigan this year. I see John Gourlay is on. He is one of our leaders in Chelsea. He's setting up a meeting, I think it's in April, at the Chelsea Library to talk about the Solarized program. We have an effort going on in Livonia. I think Charles is on. Charles Morris is on tonight. Charles is the leader, the GLREA leader for our efforts in Livonia. And then we also have an effort going on in Royal Oak, Michigan, through an active volunteer. I am actively talking to the Michigan Energy Office to try and get a grant from them so we can hire a full-time staff person that can help provide support for these various solarized efforts around the state. So if any one of you would be interested in potentially working with me to set up a solarized activity in where you live, Grand Rapids or Northern Michigan, wherever it may be, think about it and let me know, because we'd be very happy to work with you. The other benefit of the Solarized program is we also hope to get a lot more members to join GLRE as a result. So it's 4 minutes to 8 o'clock. How about if I stop here and take any final questions or comments from any of you about what I've been talking about or what John has talked about? So go ahead.
Hey, John, good evening. Mark Furta, how are you?
I'm terrific, Mark. How are you, sir?
Good, sir. Sorry, I was a little bit late in joining. So, John, I just wanted to mention, that McNaught McKay is still very interested in the solarized programs as well. As many of you may know, there's been a large disruption in the supply chain of solar into the United States, which has somewhat limited our abilities right now to get suppliers on board to participate and offer additional discounts from the material side in the in these solarized efforts. But we expect that to kind of turn around by this summer, and look forward to getting together with you here, John, in the near future and talk a little bit more.
Well, that sounds marvelous, Mark. Mark and McKay have been longtime supporters of the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, and we really appreciate their support. And again, they're one of the sponsors of tonight's session as well. So we really appreciate that. And obviously, Mark, you can't control the supply chain that's going around the world because of COVID. But so we fully understand there's been some disruptions, but we look forward to the time when things get back to normal and that we can potentially develop the solarized model where we get a discount, not only on the installation of the system, but also the cost of panels and other materials.
Well, and there are a lot of people here that have a lot of good government connections and advocacy, and unfortunately right now this supply chain issue, especially with solar panels, isn't just related to the logistics and supply chain issues of all the other commodities we hear about. There's actually a stop on importing panels into the U.S. because of a restriction. If you look up WRO solar panels, that is protecting slave labor in a area in China that produces silica. And that has now stopped 60% of all solar panels coming into the US. And it's something that's been going on since about, I want to say back to August, September. And they haven't sorted out at the borders how to tell what product is able to come in and what product is not. So one more thing that, you know, if we can get some people in government to help us to get around this thing, it's really the limiting factor.
Well, if you could follow up, Mark, and let me know, maybe send me an email or have David send me an email about, you know, what we should do, then that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Will do. Yeah,
Okay.
because I have some of that kind of documentation that's come from some of the manufacturers and things. The one positive thing that's coming out of it, though, is that a lot of the companies now are investing back in the U.S. So we're actually seeing a movement of solar panel manufacturers back into the U.S. for the first time in 4 to 5 years, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The bad thing is, and I'm sure Matt can attest to this, finding solar panels today, and for the first time in my 15 years in this business, have seen panel prices go up. And they've gone up as much as 10% in the last 3 months.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Well, again, let's see what we can do to help spring these panels free. Mark, it's 8:01. We probably
Yes.
should wrap up. So
I should. I just want to say one thing about the Solarize program, that this year the Ann Arbor reached 2.3 megawatts in their Solarize program to date, and a large part of that was because of McNaught McKay and their contractor David Friedrichs and Homeland Solar in Ann Arbor, and their strong support of the Solarize program. So you know, these local communities, when they get into this thing, it can lead to really great stuff. And I think we'll see the solar panel stuff is going to right itself. Price is going to jump around, but it makes these kinds of Solarize programs even more important to get these discounts, so that it doesn't stop the momentum. We are speeding up the solar train, and we don't want to have it slow down for anything. So with that, I thank you all very much for attending. We will be doing the clean energy seminars every Thursday through this year, and the topics will flow from the kinds of things we're talking about now. I hope to have McNaught McKay come in later this year and talk about things. And we got some good ideas tonight about some wind things and stuff. So we'll keep this going. If you have any questions or concerns, email me. If you got ideas for things to do with your community and stuff, talk to myself or John Sarver or John Freeman, and we'll be there to help you. Again, thank you so very much. Be safe.